What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Early Read Conference Preview series rolling on. We got episode 3 here, the Big 12, the new look Big 12. And to go through it, it's not a new guest. It's an old guest. It's an old friend. It's Nick, CFB Winning Edge, at CFB Winning Edge on Twitter. Does a lot of great work on his Twitter and at Campus to Cannon. A lot of roster projections. I mean, as dense of a database you're going to find online. I use it. I know a lot of really smart people use it. He's a must follow. Again, that's at CFB Winning Edge. Nick, appreciate you taking the time, man. How's it going?
Doing great. Thanks for having me back.
So we're going to talk Big 12. And before we do teams, and then we have a bonus team at the end, but before we do any teams, I want to ask, we got a new members, some old members leaving. As the realignment picture comes into play, and I know we were kind of kicking this around last year, are you attacking this conference a little differently before we get into it? Or are you kind of waiting and seeing? I'm talking like whether it's the travel for the old Pac-12 teams coming to the Big 12, maybe new look in terms of offense and defensive schemes, or are you more, let's see how this goes first, and then I'll make adjustments as we go?
I'm torn a little bit, honestly, because this time last year, the Big 12 had a bit of turnover, had 3 additions from one independent BYU and 2 from the AAC. And the way I do projections, our CFP Winning Edge team strength projections, we were basically high across the board on those new teams. And so that worried me a bit this year, a little less so in the Big 12 itself, because I do think that the Big 12 is just so completely wide open that I'm just sort of going to step back, see what happens for it in particular. But I've been thinking more and more about it. This is off topic, so we're already starting off on a great start as far as going long here. But my projections absolutely love SMU, and so they're in a similar situation to where Cincinnati and Houston were in last season, and so that has me a bit worried. And I've also put a lot of thought into some of the former Pac-12 teams who are in the Big Ten, and to a lesser extent, well, maybe to in some ways a more greater extent due to the travel, the 2 that are in the ACC. I do want to, I do worry about Stanford and Cal as far as travel goes. I'm worried about it a little less in the Big 12 because those teams are a little bit closer together. You're not having, coast to coast trips a few times a year. And so I'm not sure it's going to add up quite like it will for Cal and Stanford. But one thing, and I've mentioned this, I've got a thrice weekly morning show on the CFB Winning Edge YouTube channel called Good Morning College Football. We're doing team previews right now, 1 a day. And I get long-winded about it, but I've mentioned in several of those teams that we've talked about already that one thing that weighs on me a little bit is I wonder how these teams that are having to prepare for a new conference opponent just about every single week, how that prep time and everything that goes into that to getting a hold on a brand new team week after week after week after week. You can do it early in the season on conference play. You have the whole summer. But my limited experience with the coaching background, it's a grind, and just to add more time to, extra film and extra research and all that sort of stuff. There's a little bit of a shorthand, in the SEC where all the coaches were part of the same staff dating back. They know each other pretty well. There's a lot more of a process that goes into the week to week preparing for a team that you're not that familiar with. So I do worry about that a little bit, and I have no idea how to incorporate that into my projections or my personal opinions. Just kind of wait back and see for the most part.
And I think it's interesting when you look at last year's Big 12, and it's you got to kind of look at it a little, each situation's a little unique. And I think you could argue the Pac-12 teams coming over as a whole are probably a better group talent wise than the AAC/BYU teams coming over just on as like an average. But you look at those teams that came over: Cincinnati 1-8 in Big 12 play, Houston 2-7 in Big 12 play, BYU 2-7 in Big 12 play, UCF, who is probably the most talented team of that bunch, only 3-6. So there was a bit of a learning curve to the Big 12. Of course, now Texas and Oklahoma leave, and I think we could agree a better crop end to end of Pac-12 teams are coming into the league. So I think it's pretty interesting how this is all going to shake out. I'm excited to go through the teams and see if we agree, disagree on how some of these certain teams bear fruit. I also think it's interesting, and it's evident in the odds and the win totals everywhere. It's pretty wide open. It's pretty flat. The historic two juggernauts of this conference are now in the SEC in Texas and Oklahoma. So you look just right off the bat, Utah, who's new to the Big 12, they are the favorite. Kansas State, the second choice, right behind Utah. And then you see a bit of a drop off to a really crowded group of like 8-1 to 12-1, and then it drops further down. So we'll start with the new member, Utah. Utah comes in plus 320 to win the Big 12, win total in the 9.5 range, shaded towards the over. This is a team I love. I've loved for years. It's been a proven product in the Pac-12. Last year, given maybe a mulligan with injuries all over the roster, including to quarterback Cam Rising, doesn't play at all last season after rumored to be potentially back. He actually ended up having complete reconstructive knee surgery, misses all of last year. He's back. I think it's like his 7th season now. A lot of returning production here, including tight end Brant Kuthi. Nick, how do you see Utah making the jump this year? Because I think on paper, we can agree with all the returning production, all the talent, probably the best team or most proven team and rightfully the favorite. But do you see that playing out once the games start?
So I'm going to repeat myself a lot, I'm sure, with a lot of these teams, and most of it. The first thing I'm going to say probably about both of them, or about most teams that we'll talk about, is I really don't have a great read on this team. I defer to the numbers 99% of the time. And my numbers have always struggled a little bit with Utah because they're a team that doesn't recruit at an elite level. As you mentioned, the Big 12, now those two sort of elite or close to it recruiters are gone. That really opens things up, I think, as far as, who's going to step up and be that recruiting juggernaut, or if a team is capable of that. Will Utah get a little bit more? Will they be able to not be the team that just consistently overachieves their talent profile? Will they actually raise the talent profile a little bit? But my numbers have Utah actually number 2. There's a bit of a surprise team who is my number 1 power rankings team in the Big 12. If anybody out there is not familiar with our stuff, by now it might be well known. But Utah's number 2, and they're a top 25 team in our power rankings, a little lower probably than most people. And so I'm not fully trusting the numbers. I do understand where Utah could be, should be the team to beat here, especially if Rising is back and fully healthy, especially if Keithy is back and fully healthy. They added some good depth through the transfer portal. Dorian Singer, hopefully he'll have a little bit of a bounce back season, emerge as a maybe go-to wideout for Rising, hit the portal pretty hard to fill some holes in the secondary. The front 7 looks really, really good on paper, usually plays even better than that. Just sort of the track record of success there. So I don't know. Utah is a team that I do have favored in 10 games. So if they take care of business there, they're going to be going to the Big 12 championship game.
Yes.
But as is the case with just about everybody, there are so many matchups where it's projected within a touchdown, a lot of close to coin flips that I just don't honestly have a great feel for this team in particular just yet. But if Rising is back and fully healthy, that's really something they can build around. And this is a team that consistently gets more out of its talent than most. So I think that they've earned sort of the benefit of the doubt, and I think deservingly is the team to beat according to the market and the odds makers.
Yeah, I think this is a team where maybe you're late on the boat and they don't really have an early test game to prove it, but I would obviously like to see Rising really kind of play before at a high level before I necessarily jump all in on this team being the favorite, lay the short number on them. The schedule, I would say, fairly easy relative to the Big 12. Like you mentioned, favored in 10 of 12 games. I mean, you go through, there's a few tricky spots where you go, first of all, the bye schedule for them does set up pretty nicely for them. They come out of a bye short week. They play at Arizona State. They're back home for TCU, then back on the road to Houston. So that's a little tricky. Last game of the year at UCF. But I would say the real early test and why maybe it's a later season thing with Utah is week 4 at Oklahoma State. I have that game lined as Oklahoma State actually favored in that game. I believe they're
I do too.
+1 in the like the DraftKings early game of the year market. And then they're home Arizona. I don't really know how to make heads or tails Arizona, another team going through some transition. So I think Utah's reliable, but maybe not worth like this price as the favorite. I think they're getting this price more based on their high floor relative than like their high ceiling. So, and I think you look at the offense, you mentioned Dorian Singer, Michael Pittman as well. Kuthi, again, to me, it comes down to can Rising be what he was 2 years ago? Because if that's the case, then yeah, they're probably the best team in the Big 12. I don't think anyone's going to argue that. Defense to me, high floor, did well in the portal. I don't have a lot of questions there. To me, it's Rising determines how strong this team is and if they really are like college football playoff good. And yeah, I mean, we could keep moving. We could talk Kansas State. I think this is going to happen for every team we talk about in the Big 12. There are questions with Kansas State. And I want to start here. I think we could agree talent-wise, Avery Johnson is a step up from Will Howard. But what about the loss of Calvin Klein, the offensive coordinator? Now they promote offensive line coach to offensive line coach Connor Riley to offensive coordinator. How do you see this Kansas State offense gelling? There's still some talent back for sure, but I think there's a few more questions than I would like for a team. Again, 9.5 win total. This one shaded towards the under, like that -145 range. You could find a flat 9. Nick, am I alone here that there's a little bit of like red flags up here? Maybe call it yellow flags.
So my projections for K-State might be the biggest projected edge of any team
Interesting.
that we'll do this year.
Okay.
And it's just the way that my numbers work. K-State, kind of like Utah, but to an even greater degree, just doesn't stack up very well on paper. Returning production is like I do a whole big returning production database and go pretty in depth there. I don't use returning production as a specific piece of the power ratings, but I do go player by player and do ratings and all that sort of stuff. So regardless, the returning production number pretty low for the Big 12. Some of the top rated teams as far as bringing back. I mean, there are 3 teams that rank in the top 5 in returning production. K-State's 60th, so not terribly, or not terrible, but they're 104th on the offensive side of the ball. They're 12th on the defensive side of the ball, but offensively, I think is where my numbers really kind of struggle a little bit. A lot of people are very high on Avery Johnson. Got to see what he could do toward the end of last season. I think he has a chance to be a really, really great player. Losing Colin Klein, I think hurts just a little bit, but promoting from within, I like the continuity there. There are some questions about Johnson's throwing ability. Will he be able to take the next step as a passer in his first full season as a starter? And if not, is he going to maybe run too much, get beat up, and then you kind of neutralize the best of his skill set? DJ Giddens, I think, is a great running back, can certainly help take a little bit of the pressure off of Avery Johnson. I'm a bit worried about the offensive line. That's where the returning production number really takes a hit. Dropping down from Will Howard to Avery Johnson, in theory, you're losing a lot of production there. But I think, there are some people who thought that maybe Avery Johnson would take that job away from Will Howard. He's just sort of knocking on the door, ready to go. But when you have 3 full-time starters who are out of eligibility, another part-time starter who was hurt for the first half of last season, Christian Duffy, also gone, do bring in an FCS guy with double-digit starts last season. But there's just a lot of turnover, in that unit. You're rebuilding there. Yes, a lot of questions. This team has struggled to throw the ball consistently in the past. Now you have a passer that's, arguably a little less, a little step in the wrong direction, maybe compared to Will Howard there. So a team that ranks, 62nd in my roster strength numbers, which are the talent numbers adjusted for experience and production. They're going to have to significantly overachieve to really be a conference title contender. And like Utah, K-State has a track record of overachieving, but are they capable of, being an FBS average roster and playing like, a top 15 team? And I'm, I guess, a little bit skeptical of that. Do have them favored in what is it, 8 games, but so many of those, especially in the middle part of the season, are almost pure toss-ups. I mean, counted up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 total games I have projected within a field goal. So they could come out on the right side. Coaching and development and all that sort of thing maybe gives them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in those types of games. But to consistently week after week have to win a very, very close, evenly matched game, it's tough to do. And yeah, my projections are definitely not very forgiving in that situation. And so, I've got K-State more of a team that's like a top 40, top 35 type team than a true conference title contender.
Yeah, you make a great point about Kansas State. Like Utah, tend to overachieve, probably get more than what their roster typically has. Avery Johnson, I understand the talent's there, and I could end up with some egg on my face. But you look at last year, you mentioned run first. You go through like his PFF, and he ended up playing, 70. He had 72 dropbacks across 4, 6, 7 games. 72 dropbacks. That's about like 10 per game. Only 3 big time throws to 3 turnover worthy plays. So as a passer, if this becomes like a one-dimensional, we're only going to run, maybe Johnson gets figured out a little bit more and a little bit faster than people were anticipating. You mentioned losing Cooper Beebe on the offensive line. This offense should be good, but I wonder if it's worthy of like this price tag where it's plus 390 to win the Big 12. Not to mention, Kansas State typically in that 7.5 win total range, maybe 8.5. This is a huge jump in expectation for a Kansas State team that, like you mentioned, the returning production isn't there. There's too many questions for me where this isn't a team that you're certain that it's up arrow. It could be a team that's maybe neutral or trending downwards, maybe just a few too many questions. So Kansas State, to me, I'm a little iffy on. I like the under as well, if anything. On the defense side of the ball, also a few numbers that where when I'm going through my preseason process and I see these numbers and I go, it's tough to trust these things yet again. They held teams to 28% on third down conversion percentage. They got off the field very well on third down, and they were 13th in the country in terms of turnovers gained. So to me, it's a lot of timeliness. They made big plays, things that don't necessarily, I don't want to say luck because that kind of disregards some things. Some teams are just really good at doing those things, but it's tough to keep that up year over year. So I do think that there's some questions on if the defense could hold up their end of the bargain as well. You go through their schedule, they avoid some of the top teams for sure in the Big 12. They don't play Utah, but there's not that many easy pockets in the schedule where it's like, oh, Kansas State could really build up a head of steam here. I actually see a lot more vulnerability. Talking at Tulane week 2, I know they have a new coach, but that's never an easy opportunity. Tulane beat Kansas State just a few years ago. Now you're going to New Orleans. And the following week, you're back home. You're hosting an Arizona team that has a future NFL wide receiver in McMillan. And then you're back on the road and playing at Provo against a BYU team that isn't very good. But we're talking like sticky travel spots. That's as difficult as you're going to have in the Big 12. A bye week's negated by a trip to Colorado. Then you're back on the road to play West Virginia. They finished their season at Iowa State. So to me, with a win total of 9.5, there's just not a lot of margin for error. And the mixture of lack of returning production, question marks along the coaching staff, and some maybe natural regression, all put it together. It's just a team that looks more like, to me, 7, 8, maybe 9 wins rather than 10, 11 wins. Because to me, this just doesn't seem like a college football playoff team. And that's what this win total is kind of implying, at least a contender.
Yeah, I agree. And projections definitely line up with that. I mean, our official win total projection is 6.93, which seems really, really low, but also very much within the realm of possibility, I think.
I think it's baking in that like negative tail, right? That like there might, it's not as this team isn't as sticky as maybe this win total would need to be, which is like a big red flag. I think we could agree on there. Team that has been receiving some love in the preseason betting market. They saw their win total jump from 7.5 to 8. I was part of this love. This is the team that caught my eye during my work. Oklahoma State. I mean, everybody back. Everybody of substance is back from the team that went to the Big 12 title game. I think, and Nick, I'm interested in your thoughts on their team last year, but this was an offense that really hummed by the end of the season, top 25 in things like EPA per play. The defense was a bit of a concern, but the offense really clicked after the Mike Gundy goes to Alan Bowman full time and says, okay, you're the quarterback after trotting out 3 different guys. Ollie Gordon's back after winning the Doak Award. Offensive line is as experienced as any team in the country. They have 6 redshirt seniors, and they were excellent last season. So there should be some good stuff there. Defense, like I mentioned, a little leaky, but there's some returning production. Second-year coordinator, Brian Nardo, so maybe that starts to gel. Nick, am I wrong to think that this Oklahoma State team, of all the questions in the Big 12, has as high of a floor as any team?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, I think. You mentioned so much coming back. Oklahoma State's number 2 in my returning production numbers overall, 3rd on offense, 8th on defense. That experience, because we do adjust these individual player ratings and position by position, all that based on experience and production. They're now a top 25 team in roster strength. So even though, maybe they recruit at, top 40, top 45 level, because they are more experienced more often than not than the team they're lining up against, that's going to be a little bit to their benefit. All 5 starters on the offensive line coming back. Ollie Gordon, one of the top maybe non-quarterback Heisman contenders this year. Even, a couple of good wide receivers, Brendan Presley and Rashad Owens, but Dejon Stribling missed most of the, season last year due to injury. He'll be back as a starter, started early last season. So all that with Alan Bowman, who's a 7th-year guy as well. Not the most spectacular quarterback, but he's probably not going to make too many mistakes, even though he did throw 14 picks last year. But should, at least in theory, keep this team in good position. Isn't going to do too many things to lose you a football game. But you brought up some interesting points, or you mentioned it very briefly, like maybe you said it explicitly, or maybe something you said made me think of something. So they went 10-4 last year, right? 7-2 in the Big 12, a 10-win team, conference title contender, lost to Texas in the Big 12 championship game. I had to do a double take, and I might have to rerun these numbers to see if this is true. But I track, post-game win expectancy numbers from the previous year, use college football data. There are other numbers out there. I know Bill Connolly has some. But if you were to add all those up and look at second order wins, Oklahoma State last season played more like a 6-win team than a 10-win team.
Said it explicitly.
Right. Okay. I was thinking as you were saying, because I was looking at the team performance numbers, which is, looks at some similar things, but tries to look at stats only, based only on, how well did this team play on the field last season. And they ranked 60th in our team performance numbers. So again, that's more what we see, a team that's barely sneaking into a bowl game. They ended up with what looked like a really, really nice record. Were able to do enough to play their way into a conference championship game. But quite honestly, statistically speaking, this just wasn't that good of a team last year. So on the one hand, you're bringing everybody back from a 10-win team. On the other hand, those 10 wins may be a little bit misleading. If you look, stat by stat, there's a lot of 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s in the offensive side of the ball. There's some stats where they're triple digits defensively, 116th in yards per play allowed against FBS opponents, 124th in yards per pass attempt against, 102nd in College Football Data's EPA per play equivalent, PPA. They were 69th in defensive team performance, 88th against the pass, 69th against the run. And yeah, everybody's back, but that was a unit that really, really struggled last season. Even the offense, as good as some of the individual players were, was only 56th in offensive team performance. So I have questions about this Oklahoma State team, but if they're able to navigate, again, a manageable schedule and win a lot of close games like they did last season, then yeah, this team absolutely could play and win a Big 12 championship game. We've got them favored in 11 games.
Yeah.
But even more than everybody we've talked about so far, I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4 games are within 1 point in our projections. I mean, they're going to be playing so many coin flips. And like you said about, Avery Johnson last year in Kansas State and turnovers and all that, you kind of have to figure, they're maybe a little bit more likely to regress than they are to continue to be able to win in that same situation. So I think the floor is absolutely there. I think that if this team were to win, 7 games, that would be a huge disappointment. And the potential is there, as I said, for them to win the conference title. But I think the most likely outcome is more in that 8-win range, or that 8-4 sort of finish where they lose a lot of those close games that they were able to win last year.
So my theory, because I see the same numbers, or I saw the same numbers that you saw, the only reason why I think Oklahoma State is a bit of a unique case is if you look at the trajectory of their season, where they start with that 3 quarterback system and they don't know who's who. They get smoked by South Alabama, who was pretty good last year. But besides the point, it was a team that started 2-2 before they really got their bearings. And they come out of their bye week, and that's where the season really started almost. And they end up finishing the season. We got 2, 5, 7, 7-2 in the regular season. So to me, I wonder if that second half or third, 2/3 of the season, that was maybe a little bit more indicative of the roster. And that's where this team really got a little unlocked. And that's why I think the team can be a little bit better, because I agree with you on a lot of the numbers show that this is probably closer to a 6, maybe give them a little bump, 7-win team. But I think with this amount of returning production, it's hard not to be enticed with how good this roster might be with how they finished. Then you also look at the coaching staff, continuity everywhere, and Mike Gundy in 19 years in Stillwater has won at least 8 games in 13 of them. And that also includes going under that mark in the first 3. So the last 16 seasons in Stillwater, he has won at least 8 games in 13 seasons. So to me, I think there's a little bit more of a substance to that team, a team like Oklahoma State playing above their level, even if I think this team actually might be just straight up talented enough to win 8, 9 games. And the market has certainly went that way now. The win total is pretty much like a flat 8 everywhere. Looking at the schedule, they play Utah. We mentioned that game. Game's at home, and the game's pretty much a pick 'em. After that, there are challenging road trips to Manhattan to play Kansas State, Fort Worth to play TCU. But after that, the other 3 conference road games are at BYU off a bye, at Baylor, and at Colorado. 3 teams that are projected to to fight for bowl eligibility. So the schedule is as forgiving as you could ask for, really, given the Big 12. So I think that there's a lot to like with this Oklahoma State team, in my opinion, especially because I think the defense, I think it can only go up from here, given the continuity there, given it's a second-year DC and Nardo, who I think maybe needed an extra year to get a little acclimated with the D1 level. So I still believe in this Oklahoma State team, even though there are definitely some warning signs. I'm going to forego those concerns, and I'm going to stay with it. And I like the Pokes this year. If you could find like a cheap 7.5, I'd rather that. But I think this team is pretty good. Another team that is entering the year with sky high expectations, higher than they've probably been in 2 decades. Kansas win total, we'll call it 8, shaded towards the over. 850 to win the Big 12. I think this is the first time in modern, like definitely the legalized era, that Kansas is entering with a win total this high. Need to replace Andy Koltanecki at offensive coordinator, but they do get Jalen Daniels back and a host of key contributors on the offensive end. Reports say they're not changing their scheme. That was incredibly impactful. The defense was still pretty bad, but the offense, even without Daniels, he only played 3 games, was still very, very strong for Big 12 standards. Nick, is Kansas going to live up to the hype, or is this where you start to see some regression potentially?
I think if Jalen Daniels is healthy, that this Kansas team is going to be in the mix for a Big 12 championship. If he's not healthy, it could they definitely could struggle. I still think that Lance Leopold, the work that he has done, and sort of he's definitely earned my benefit of the doubt as far as finding ways to stay competitive, find ways to win games that maybe they shouldn't. So even if Daniels goes down, I won't completely write them off, but there's a much farther gap, much bigger gap between Daniels and Cole Ballard than there was between Daniels and Jason Bean. Jason Bean was pretty unique.
That's very notable, though. The depth is not as strong behind Daniels this year for sure.
Right. And there are plenty of whispers that Daniels or we can trust our eyes too, right? I mean, that maybe he is just not going to be ready to take on a full season. So back problems are always scary to me. So it's a big if on Jalen Daniels. Otherwise, there's a lot, I think, to like. And if Daniels is back and fully healthy and capable of playing almost a full season, this could be one of the best offenses in the conference. Devin Neal, getting him back for a 4th season was big. Both starting wide receivers. There's a lot of experience in the wide receiver room as it is key. 3 starters back on the offense, or I guess 2 starters, but then they bring in 3 really experienced offensive linemen via the transfer portal, a couple of whom are likely to start. So I really, really like this Kansas offense. Defensively, as you said, not a great unit. I think they took a step, pretty significant step in the right direction. I mean, for the previous 3 seasons, they were 107th, 129th, and 117th in defensive team performance. Last season, they were 74th. So if they can maintain that, or maybe take a inch forward just a little bit, that I think that this team together is going to be very difficult to beat, and I do think that the schedule is quite manageable. I mean, looking at it, there's no Utah here. There's no Oklahoma State here. That sets up quite well. It is a little tricky because they're not expected, I don't believe, to play any games at their home stadium.
That was my follow-up question.
So that is a little, when it comes to, all right, how much home field advantage should they really get? That's something I don't have a great answer for right now. But they, I think, are just a solid team that's going to be tough to beat. And I like to play sort of a guessing game prior to fully updating all my stuff from the previous year to the next year. And I was trying to figure out, okay, who do I think is going to be, the top 5, the top 10 in our power rankings? Who do I think the team to beat in each conference was? And Kansas was my pick. I thought our numbers were going to think that this was going to be the highest rated team in the Big 12. They're 3rd, and there's not a big gap between Kansas and number 1. But I've had a good feeling about this Kansas team, and that feeling gets even better if Jalen Daniels is able to play anywhere close to what we saw a couple of years ago.
Yes, I think so. Kansas, they are not they're rebuilding their stadium, or they're knocking it down. They're building another one. So they're playing all their home games in the Kansas City metropolitan area, and all the Big 12 games are being played at Arrowhead, where the Chiefs play. So I guess you could maybe give them a ding for home field advantage. I don't know if it will be that much, but I agree with you. The schedule is fairly manageable. My only concern is, so they're not changing the scheme on offense. And while there are guys like Neal, Highshaw back, they combined for over 2,000 yards. A lot of targets are back. Lost some on the offensive line, but they definitely hit the portal to clear some of that up. To me, it comes down to Daniels and his availability. He only played in 3 games last year, and Jason Bean was above replacement level. So if he goes down, I think that the floor kind of could come out a little bit faster. Secondary should be strong. This was a defense that I would say is poor, but I would say trending in the right direction behind that defense that has guys like Kobe Bryant back. The passing defense is definitely the stronger part relative to the rush defense. But yeah, I mean, this is a team, Kansas, where maybe we could argue that the expectation's climbing, but there's good reason for it, especially if Daniels is ready to play. So Kansas, I think, again, a pretty rock solid team. You mentioned the schedule. Just an interesting point about it is they are not playing home or away consecutive. They're traveling every other week, basically. So it's home, away, and so on and so forth, which I think is interesting. I don't know if I have like a betting or an actionable opinion on it. I just think that was pretty interesting. But they do avoid Utah and Oklahoma State, and also Arizona. They do play at Kansas State in week 9, their rivalry game. So next team up, and to me is also in like that bucket of teams that intrigue me. So I'm curious your opinion, Nick, on UCF. 850 to win the conference, 7.5 win total. It was a team I liked last year as a long shot to win the Big 12. Didn't catch on as well. Some injuries ran into them, but I like what Gus did in the portal this year, bringing KJ Jefferson. They do lose Baker to the NFL, but their next 5 top pass catchers are back. RJ Harvey and Johnny Richardson are back at running back. Penny Boone, big portal ad. So I think this UCF offense is going to be good to go, especially, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving. UCF has an ability to possibly become the best offense in the Big 12. I think that is attainable with Gus Malzahn calling the offense. Defense, there's talent. Didn't necessarily produce last year, but there is talent. I promise, given the recruiting rankings and some of the portal that they brought in, or the guys that they brought in from the portal. You have some SEC level guys coming in with that pedigree. Do you think it could all gel this year? Again, the win total is 7.5, pretty much, minus 115, minus 105 each way.
So UCF is our top ranked team in our CP Winning Edge Team Strength Power Rankings, which is,
it makes sense. If you look at the roster, it makes sense.
I mean, it's strange, and I was not really happy when I saw that when it came out, because these numbers, and I keep saying the numbers are numbers, all this stuff. My opinion does not factor into this at all. It's just what the player ratings say, what the coach ratings say, what the team performance ratings say. Throw it all together. We've been doing it more or less the same way since 2018, and it's been pretty good, more than not. And so I do kind of get out of the way, trust the process, but also we were really high on UCF last season. Did not work out. This team really underachieved as far as wins and losses go, and as far as comparing that to their talent profile. As you said, it's a really, really talented roster. There's a lot of transfer talent, a lot of players who began their careers as really highly rated recruits at major Power 4 programs, and found their way, whether it's back home or reconnected with Gus Malzahn or whatever, back at UCF, and so that messes with the numbers just a little bit, because they've been so transfer heavy over the course of the last few years, even more so than just what we're seeing in the current times. But in another way of looking at it, this UCF team, or last year's UCF team, was kind of the anti Oklahoma State in some ways. According to second order wins, this was a 9-win team, not a 6-win team. And also, according to our team performance numbers, this UCF team, or last year's UCF team, ranked 36. So, clearly a top 40 team as far as what the stats say, and a top 10 offense. Just couldn't find ways to win some games, couldn't find ways, found ways to lose games. Like they did that Baylor meltdown, where they had a 96% post-game win expectancy number, had a huge lead in that game, and ended up letting Baylor come back and win. So the Texas Tech game was,
Yes.
not much different as far as the post game numbers and a close loss. So this UCF team had a lot of missed opportunities, but if you get past the final score, try to dig in a little bit deeper, played better than that record would indicate. So will that pay off this year? They don't have quite the returning production number that Oklahoma State does, but we're aggressive, as you mentioned, adding guys through the portal. I think KJ Jefferson is a perfect quarterback for Gus Malzahn and what he likes to do. Just the incredible depth that they put together in that running back room. They're going to be able, I think, to run the ball very, very well, very consistently. If they want to, dominate time of possession, limit opponent possessions, all that good stuff, they can. The defense, as you said, struggled a bit. I mean, couldn't get off the field. They were 124th in success rate against last season. So we'll see how some of the moves that they made to shore up that, through the transfer portal, both projected starting linebackers are newcomers. Two projected starters in the secondary are transfer players, one on the defensive line. So they saw, an issue, had some holes to fill, and we're aggressive about doing it. We'll just have to see if it works out. But on paper, the way that we calculate things, this is quote unquote the best team in the Big 12. I personally really struggle to come to terms with that. But I could see a path to this UCF team being a conference title contender. Certainly, I think the talent is there. I think I've always been a huge Gus Malzahn fan, and I think this offense on paper looks almost like what he would want to draw it up to be. So if that plays itself out and it all comes together on the field, this could be a very, very dangerous team. But like everybody else, they're going to have to win a lot of close games. We do have them favored in every regular season game, all 12 regular season games. So our numbers, CFP Winning Edge team strength power ratings really, really love UCF more so than I do personally. But yeah, we're big fans, I guess.
I wonder if, and I'm not going to say KJ Jefferson is an elite passer by any means, but John Reese Plumlee really struggled. And like going back to that Kansas State conversation, like with Avery Johnson, not again comparing necessarily the two, but similar situation where John Reese Plumlee, when it became obvious passing situations, and he was banged up last year, it really became a struggle for UCF to move the ball. KJ Jefferson is a reliable passer, and we've seen him play at a high level in the SEC. I think that dimension can really open up this UCF offense, and it could quickly emerge as the best in the Big 12. I agree. I'm bullish on them. Not all the way that they're the best team in the Big 12, but I agree that this team can easily be an 8, 9, maybe even 10-win team, just given the schedule as well. It sets up pretty nicely for them. I don't have them favored in every game, but they get Utah last week of the season. Then Utah's going to have to travel all the way across the country to play them. That is going to be, in my opinion, their most difficult opponent. They do have to play at Florida, which is a difficult game against an SEC opponent, but there's some downside risk with Florida by week 6 that they could already be kind of quitting on their coach. And there's already been talk in like the preseason write-ups about how UCF is treating that game as a statement-like game, not to get too caught up in the cliches, but road trip to TCU, Iowa State, West Virginia, those are gettable games. Those games will be lined around, between under a touchdown, we'll call it. They will be expected to compete in those games. So I think that there's definitely some upside with this UCF team. And as for the defense, I agree. The defense really struggled. I mean, 111th in defensive success rate, especially against the run. They really, really struggled. 125th in EPA per rush. Again, though, will it be like, to me, it's like, is that the bottom? And now it's time to maybe buy the dip and this team is going to start trending upward? Or is this team that's Big 12 level with all that talent really going to struggle again? Gus demoted both OC and DC, and Gus is now calling the plays. So I think there's cause for optimism that this team is trending in the right direction. So I think UCF is another team to potentially buy up. It's up arrow there with a win total of 7.5. Another team with a win total of 7.5 is Iowa State. You look at all the returning production models, they are going to be at the very, very top. Essentially, everyone of substance is back, including Rocco Becht. This is an offense that was pretty explosive given where they were left before the season. I think they actually ended up turning in a pretty solid effort given the gambling scandal before. So, Nick, do you think Iowa State, again, this is a team that was kind of left for dead going into last year, and people were like, maybe this Matt Campbell situation, maybe he missed the boat, but he ended the season on a pretty high note, including beating Kansas State before the end of the year. Is this Iowa State team trending up? I'm kind of lost in between. This should be a good team, but does the talent match how, the returning productions maybe influencing maybe the perception on the team?
I wonder if this Iowa State team, one, I will say, like probably 8 other Big 12 teams, it would not shock me if Iowa State finds a way to, be in the Big 12 championship.
Yes.
But on the other hand, I wonder if this Iowa State team is maybe a better team on the field in a lot of ways and ends up with a pretty similar record. It seemed like last year, I mean, I'm absolutely with you that my expectations were very, very low. And for that team to find a way to get to a bowl game was pretty remarkable given what it looked like at the beginning of the season. So I wonder if in a lot of ways that, overachieving last year, we get a little bit of regression even with so much returning. And there are a lot of things to like about this Iowa State team. I know some of the NFL draft and folks in the Devi fantasy football community that I work with at Campus to Canton love Abu Sama the third, the running back, and he got limited opportunities until the end of the season, then just absolutely blew up. And the passing game, as you said, was really impressive last season. Guys like Jalen Knoll and Jaden Higgins, how they worked with Rocco Becht. I really like Benjamin Brahmer at tight end. I'm a big fan. I'm really excited to see what Isaiah Alston, the Army transfer wide receiver, does.
Very high ADOT. Very high ADOT for this offense because Rocco Becht loves to chuck the ball down the field.
Absolutely. And he's a big, another 6'4" guy. Had some, highlight practice catches that went viral last season. What can he do in an offense that's really going to be able to do the best with his skill set? The offensive line, this is another Big 12, very experienced offensive line. So offensively, there is a lot to like about this Iowa State team. I think there's certainly even room for improvement maybe in some ways because last season they really struggled to run the ball until Sama exploded there at the end. Defensively, this was a good unit, top 20, top 25 in a lot of categories, 21st in team performance defensively last season. As far as just starters returning, it's almost everybody. There's some depth there as well. I mean, a lot of guys in the 2 deep played 30% of snaps, 40% of snaps. So this is just a really, really experienced unit that played pretty good defensively last season as well. But it's, it's sort of a tough start. North Dakota is not necessarily a pushover FCS opponent in week 1. Iowa, that game is always going to be just a brutal 1 week thing on the road. Absolutely. Yeah. They do get kind of fortunate, I think, not usually for every team. I would say an off week in week 3 is a good thing, but I think having an extra week after Iowa, probably good, reset yourself. And then Arkansas State before the Big 12 race really gets going. But this Iowa State team, I think, can go in a variety of directions. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if it lost a lot of close games and came up short of reaching a bowl. I wouldn't be shocked if they're a 10-win team, make it to the Big 12 championship. So I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Our projections are very, very close to 6.5 wins. That honestly seems a little low to me, but I don't hate being under the 7.5 because I think in some ways maybe we got the perfect scenario for Iowa State last year, and it's hard to do that 2 years in a row, even with so much return.
Yeah, I agree. I think Matt Campbell's, again, a coach where I like not a lot of expectation. I like when like bowl game is a good year and maybe a little above that, and maybe one upset in Ames, not necessarily like need to win 8 to be like a solid season and to get above expectation that this win total implies. For what it's worth, I'm at 7.4 wins, so I'm pretty much right at this. I lean. My first blush was I like what I see. Then when I start diving in, like, am I maybe over influenced by the returning production and that there's so much back that it looks a little bit better? Whereas maybe this team, though, talent wise, doesn't have the ability to, handle the week in, week out grind because, well, the schedule isn't super challenging early on. They do close with at Kansas, underdog, home Cincinnati, gonna be favorite, at Utah, then home Kansas State. Maybe they limp towards the finish line. You mentioned the road trip to Iowa, never an easy thing to do. Go to Iowa and win the Cy-Hawk game. So Iowa State, I do like Rocco Becht, but I do wonder also. This was a guy who wasn't pegged to start. I mean, he was competing with JJ Cole, the gigantic recruit there. That was a prize recruit, and he beat him out. Is it almost like he was playing above his head now that the expectation has changed for this Iowa State team? Maybe this we see Beck come down to earth just a little bit. That's just my only concern. More questions here though, because we talk about Arizona, 12-1 to win the conference, win total 7.5. So Arizona is an interesting case study for me, and we did our Big Ten preview, Nick, and I was talking about Washington. And to me, Washington, their win total was a guess. Nobody, like, it's a totally new team. It's a win total where you're like, well, they went to the national championship game last year and they have some talent there and they hired a pretty good coach. Like, they're going to be solid. They'll make a bowl game for sure, but it's really just like a guess. I wonder if the same thing's happening here with Arizona. Granted, Noah Fafita and McMillan are rock solid. Don't get me wrong. And there's still talent here, but are we sure this team is like gonna be as good as last year was? Because that was as good of an Arizona team we've seen in close to a decade. So, like, where are we at with Arizona? Because to me, this number is just a guess, and I'm not sure what to do with it. I project a win total at 6.8. But again, I'm now going to put like that's my number. My eyes tell me I think that there's a little bit more downside than this number implies.
Yeah, this is another team that I'm kind of torn on a little bit. When I was trying to do that guessing game in the very early weeks of the offseason, and when those, way too early top 25 started rolling out, Arizona was, top 10, top 12 team in a lot of those. And that was before the coaching change. So certainly understandable that the team coming back this, at this point looks a little different than what it might have if Jed Fish had not taken that Washington job. But this, I was looking back, scrolling back through those second order wins and okay, did this team really deserve to be a 10-win team? And yeah, they were pretty close. 9.1 is the number that I've got here. 2 of those losses were in overtime. So, could have been even better. But thinking back to that USC triple overtime
Should have
game,
won. I had
should
Arizona
have
money
won.
line. They should have
Sure.
won.
Yeah, absolutely. But I remember thinking, or, a lot of the talk during that game and on Twitter was how embarrassing it was for USF or USC. And the week before, how close Arizona played, how embarrassing it seemed at that time for Washington, that they really struggled as much as they did with Arizona. I had no idea. I think most of the country had no idea how good this Arizona team was going to be from that point forward. And to the point where, 10 wins. And now we're talking, I think, understandably so, a team that is a top half of the Big 12, might have been preseason Pac-12 favorite or in the conversation this season. So when Noah Fafita took over as quarterback, this team really just took a step up. That I think is really something to rally around. I am worried a little bit about how injured Tet McMillan is because he got shut down during spring practice. I don't have a great understanding of what exactly the official injury is, but I remember hearing some whispers around the time that like, ooh, actually that could be bad. That could carry over into the season. So if he's 100% or close to it, then he could be the best wide receiver in college football. If he's not 100%, that's a big loss for Arizona potentially if he's not able to play at that level. But like Fafita does a lot of good things. The additions they brought in at running back with Quali Conley and Ja'Cory Merritt really solidified that position. The offensive line's pretty experienced. They hit the portal hard to add depth there. The defensive line is basically brand new, pretty close to it. So that's a little bit of a question mark. Getting Takario Davis to withdraw from the transfer portal was huge. He, I think, has All-American potential at cornerback. So that was a big win. But for every real positive, it seems like I'm coming up with at least one question that I don't know how big of a deal it could potentially be. So with the coaching change, I really like Britt Brennan. Did a great job at San Jose State, but it's not like he was consistently dominating the Mountain West and putting back-to-back 10-win seasons. He ranked 77th in our head coach ratings just based on historical coach-specific team performance. So Arizona took a little bit of a hit when Jedd Fisch stepped out, but this was a team that played certainly like a top 20, top 15 type team for most of the season, top 10 offense, top 40 defense, all of those in our team performance numbers. So, this isn't a program that's recruited at a consistently super high level. A lot of the raw 247 composite ratings on the offensive side of the ball, they rank 69th nationally, 55th defensively. So they're going to have to kind of do a little bit of the Utah Kansas State thing where they do, if they're going to win 10 games again, have to overachieve their talent profile. But I think there's enough to like, especially at the quarterback position, some of the playmaking ability of the offense, as long as that rebuilt defensive line is just not a major issue. I think the defense could be decent, maybe FBS average again. And then they're going to play a lot of close games like just about everybody else. So kind of weird. I do believe that Arizona K-State game in week 3, and there's the Baylor Utah, is it? It's early on. Those aren't conference games.
They are previously
weird.
They are previously scheduled before all the mergers, so this hangs on.
So that's a little bit of a break, maybe when you're thinking about what's their path to the Big 12 title game. But Utah early in the season on the road, probably not where I would choose that one. So like just about everybody in the Big 12, it seems, especially in this part, this pretty fat middle. I kind of throw up my hands a little bit.
Yeah, I did like getting Korsky Merritt from New Mexico. He is a gamer for sure. The defense just has a lot to replace, in my opinion. For like you mentioned, this is a defense that became top 20 in the country in most impactful metrics. Need to replace their best pass rusher and Upshaw. They need to replace 4 guys in the secondary. It's a big jump in expectation. And while Brent Brennan has done a decent job at San Jose State, came on late in the process because obviously DeBoer takes Alabama, Washington takes Fish, and now Arizona brings in Brennan. It was big win for them to keep Fafita and McMillan, but this is a big jump in expectation for a team that isn't really used to winning 8 games, isn't used to competing at a high level. The schedule pretty tricky, I would say. I mean, road trips. I know it's not conference play, but it is one of their road games to Kansas State, Utah, UCF, and TCU, and then at BYU. It's never one that makes me feel great going on the road to Provo, even though I don't think much of BYU again this year. It's never one I'm excited about. Home games against Texas Tech, West Virginia, but then they do draw Colorado, Houston, Arizona State. So to me, there's a lot of coin flip games there. And again, this is an Arizona team that had a win total of 4.5 last year. It's now at 7.5 with a lot of new faces taking over outside of just quarterback and their number one receiver, including the head coach. So I think there's a little bit of concern in Tucson for me, at least. A team that I faded last year in the Big 12 to much success, Texas Tech. Same win totals last year at 7.5. It was an injury-riddled year. They had a great year 2 years ago under Joey McGuire. Last year kind of comes back down to earth. Brennan Morden, Nick, maybe you have a better gauge on this, didn't play in the spring game with this lingering shoulder issue. They bring in Cameron Brown, the D2 transfer. Taj Brooks is back. They get Josh Kelly from Fresno State. This is still Zach Kittley's offense, which I hold in high regard. What do you make of this offense? And can Texas Tech maybe bounce back a year after a bit of a fall from grace?
So with Morton, it's similar to me, to what I said about Jalen Daniels, where I'm not 100% convinced that he's going to be 100% at the beginning of the season. If he is, then I think that the ceiling for this team is a lot higher than if he's struggling dealing with that week in week out shoulder injury for him, back injury for Jalen Daniels. And I'm with you. I'm a big fan of Zach Kittley, his offense. I think in some ways, even though disappointed a lot of college fantasy football people that I hang out with at Campus Canton a bunch, that this was not the Western Kentucky offense of a few years ago, but from a just pure college football standpoint, I think it was a really, really great sign that Zach Kittley and this coaching staff said, okay, yeah, we want to do, the spread it out, throw it a ton type thing, but we need to win football games, and Taj Brooks handing him the football is the best way that we're going to do it. So there's a real debate in that CFF community. Okay, is Taj Brooks somebody who's going to get anywhere near that kind of workload this year? I think maybe they will, because he's the best player that they've got, on this certainly on this offense, perhaps on the roster. And it worked out pretty well last season. So there, I think, are even questions before we get into the season with this team, because what's the offense really going to look like? Are they going to have Baron Morton throw it around a bunch? Is he going to be healthy enough to do that? If not, are they going to ride Taj Brooks again? And could this be a much different offense than what we might usually expect to see? But this is a program that, like in Arizona, like a Utah in some ways, doesn't recruit at a super high level, kind of have to almost time things up pretty well to get a bunch of players to come back all at the same time to really gear up to make a run. And I'm just not sure that that's the cycle that that part of the cycle that Texas Tech is in right now. So our numbers don't hate Texas Tech. Don't actually see a lot of difference between them and a team like Iowa State or some that we've yet to talk about. Could, again, not be surprised if they end up being a dangerous team that wins 7-8 games, consistently tough team to beat, or if they just sort of lose a bunch of coin flips and end up 5-7. I could see either situation for this team, especially if Morton again is not fully healthy.
Yeah, I thought the defense actually ended up stepping up pretty strong last year, above national average. 47th in net EPA per play, pretty strong, especially in terms of the secondary. My issue is on the offense, though, if they can really clear the ceiling of 8 wins, where you don't know what's up with the quarterback, you're replacing 4 of the 5 starters on the offensive line. There's just a lot of question marks for Texas Tech, but I do wonder again. Last year team dives down. Do I really think that's the level? Because there is talent on this roster, so maybe there's a bit of a bounce back. The schedule, in my opinion, and again, it's kind of how you all these teams are so clumped together, so you have to it's beauty in the eye of the beholder. I think the schedule is somewhat more forgiving than others. Of course, you have some difficult road trips, but at least the teams they play at home, they are good. I'm confident they will be favored in and probably beat. So if they take care of business at home against Abilene Christian, North Texas, Arizona State, Cincinnati, Baylor, Colorado, and West Virginia, that's 7 games right there. Can you win one coin flip on the road and all of a sudden you're over your win total? You know what I mean? So it's not something I'm rushing to play, but to me, Texas Tech is a team where I could see them maybe not contending for the Big 12 title at 13-1, but in the mix and, winning 8-9 games and, maybe a gaudy record that gets them a good bowl game. I could see it at least. TCU, I think, is a team that is more of the trendy dark horse type after they bottom out last year. Win total 7.5, shaded under. Josh Hoover came in at the end of last season. Actually, looked pretty good. The team went 3-3, but he passed for 2,000 yards in those 6 starts, a few picks, gets the full offseason. But Ken Seals is in from Vanderbilt. Maybe he can push for the job if Hoover doesn't have it locked up. Cam Cook is getting a lot of buzz at running back. Eric McAllister comes from Boise State. To me, it was the defense that was a big issue last year. Fell off completely under Joe Gillespie. They go out and get former Boise State coach Andy Avalos, who he cut his teeth with Oregon as their DC. There's a lot of high-level guys here still for Sonny Dykes. Do you think, or so Nick, should I ask, not that national championship game and missing a bowl game have to be the two bars, but which side do you kind of lean towards, and where do you see TCU shaking out in this crowded Big 12?
I think I would be much more confident saying if those are my two options, TCU's going to go to the college football playoff or they're going to miss a bowl.
You have to lean one way.
Sure. I would say miss a bowl. I
agree, by the way. I'm with you.
Our projections do have TCU making it to a bowl game, winning 6.5 games. Kind of some interesting matchups, at home against Arizona. We have TCU as a slight favorite. That was a little bit of a surprise to me. Right around a touchdown at Utah is a bit of a surprise to me. So there's not a big gap between this TCU team in the middle of the pack, fighting for, trying to climb up the ladder a little bit. They just have to get hot a few weeks in a row to really make a move, I think, in the Big 12. And there were some things to like last season on the offensive side of the ball, especially. This team ran the football pretty well. Obviously, there's turnover at the running back position on the offensive line, so not sure how repeatable that is. But that was a area where the offense excelled a bit last season. If they can play a little bit better defensively, which there's some experience in the front seven, and then they went hard in the transfer portal. I highlight our incoming transfers in a light blue color on our Google Sheets, and there's blue all over the place in the two deep in the back seven. So in some ways, there are so many new faces that even though they're not bottom of the barrel as far as returning production goes, I wonder a little bit what this defense is going to look like, because they struggled last season, 91st in defensive team performance, weren't particularly good against the pass or the run, but that returning production number is pretty good, top 25 nationally, especially when you incorporate those incoming transfers. There's reason to think, a little bit of reason to think that this is going to be a better defense this season. But I'm just not so sure. The margins here are so small. I could see if we get the Josh Hoover who got hot at the end of last season, he steps in what should be a pretty good wide receiver core. Maybe they take a step forward as a passing team and don't take a huge step back running the football, which is a little bit of a question with so much turnover on the offensive line and at running back. Then this could be another dangerous team. But if Josh Hoover, who I do believe missed all of spring practice due to injury, if they have to rely on Ken Seals, who's experienced, but not super exciting, right? And that offensive line doesn't come together, and the new faces on defense don't really work out, then we could be looking at another 5-7 team. So I hate to say the same thing over and over. I could see this team win 8 games, or I could see them win 5. But that's just sort of where we are, I think, at this point in the Big 12. And these teams are so similar in a lot of ways. It's just going to be who can win a close game.
So I have for TCU, they're either underdogs or favored by less than, or underdogs or favored than less than by 4.5, which I consider like close spreads in 9 of the 12 games this year. So maybe the coin flips their way a bunch and you go over, or this team kind of struggles yet again. So TCU, I don't have a strong opinion. I think there's a little bit too many questions for me to really get too excited or too negative. I'm curious what you think though, Nick, about West Virginia, because going through my work, going through these teams, West Virginia last year, Neil Brown goes from like the hottest seat in the country. Everyone says he'll be the first coach fired. He becomes like a hero almost. They go to a bowl game. Really, really great year. Off season, Garrett Green is the talk of, I think it's the Peyton Manning Passing Academy or whatever camp they're at. Garrett Green looks great. They're top 10 in returning production. The defense was strong. The offense wasn't great, but it made it work. And again, the team really overachieved. So the win total is 6.5 now. So it's a big jump in expectation. The idea is they're going to at least make a bowl game. Am I wrong to think, and I'm not necessarily betting it, or maybe I will, I haven't decided yet, but am I a little wrong to be skeptical that this team can follow it up now for the second straight year? Like, did the team overachieve so much and now we're getting like a inflated number on West Virginia? Because the win total is 6.5, 18 to 1 to win the conference. I just don't see, I don't put them in the realm of basically any of the, like, to me, this is where the drop comes a little bit in terms of like contendership. Like TCU, Texas Tech, you could paint me a picture. Sure, there's talent there. West Virginia, to me, I'm just not as in on. I kind of push them closer, further down to like the next group.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair because they're like Iowa State in a lot of ways, where you think of how it played out last season's basically the best case scenario, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just difficult for a program and a roster that's built that way. It's difficult to continue to build. It can be done, but yeah, I mean, West Virginia is a team that I always worry a little bit how the travel is going to stack up for it. And the early part of the season, not too bad, as far as non-conference play goes. But a trip to Oklahoma State, a trip to Arizona, and Texas Tech, those add up a little bit. It's they get the extra home game this year, so that helps neutralize it a bit. But in a normal season or in a season where they get 5 road trips in conference play, then I really do start to worry about West Virginia. So maybe they miss the worst case scenario schedule wise there. And they do have Garrett Green to build around, who was pretty exciting quarterback. I mean, I haven't been closely following the Manning buzz, but I have heard about
some camp.
Yeah. No, it's a huge thing, and I do know that they put out some lists and stuff, and I've missed a lot of the details. But you're not the first person to mention Garrett Green that I've heard as having impressed at that event. So, and he's a darling of the CFF community. He's a top 5 quarterback, or there are some folks who think he's a top 5. I think he's like top 10 or 12 in a lot of the ADP and rankings and stuff, but he could end up, things could work out. His ceiling is maybe the best fantasy college football, quarterback. It's possible, just because his running ability, he can just turn a nothing into a big play potentially. Part of that is going to be who steps up as a playmaker at wide receiver. Hudson Clement, former walk-on, kind of did that a little bit at times. Is he going to be able to continue that? Jaden Bray, it seems like we've been waiting on a breakout for a long time. He transfers from Oklahoma State. Is he going to step in and finally kind of take that next step, become that big-time playmaker? Otherwise, they're going to probably lean on the running game a bit. Jaheim White was an incredibly productive true freshman last year when CJ Donaldson was limited by injury. So you think if those two are going to be a pretty good thunder and lightning duo in the Big 12, add Garrett Green's running ability, and if teams try to take away the run, he's going to be able to make them pay with some deep shots. But defensively, this team was nothing special, a little less than FBS average in a lot of categories, or hovering right around there. And that unit underwent the most reconstruction as far as players moving on at the end of last season. 96th in defensive returning production compared to top 10 on the offensive side of the ball. So defensively, there are some signs to indicate maybe they take a little bit of a step back. Are they going to be able to overcome that with taking another step forward from what was a top 25 offense last season? I'm not so sure. The wide receiver situation is a little bit of a concern to me, but this is a team that is going to be very tough to beat week in and week out. Quarterback is a strength. Garrett Green. I'm not sure if people are if I want to say, oh, maybe he's one of the most underrated quarterbacks. I don't know. Maybe he's not. Maybe people are talking about him, but he's a good player, and he's going to be able to put this team on his back at times potentially. I don't expect this West Virginia team to spiral necessarily, but maybe even, to repeat the same thing I've said 10 times already, so many close games. In fact, every game that I've got, every game on the West Virginia schedule, I have projected within 7.5 points. And that includes week 2 against Albany. So that's last year's Albany. There, I don't think is good this year. So that number will probably change to maybe 2 touchdowns. But this West Virginia team is just going to be, in theory, playing, week after week, games decided by a field goal. And it's just, is Garrett Green and that running game and, somewhat new look defense going to be good enough to win more of those coin flips than not?
So the reason why I haven't played the win total under yet, that game against Penn State in week 1 gives me like my antennas are up. That gives me like just all the like running dog at home, just stuns like a new look Penn State team that isn't as put together as many hope, I guess, by expectation. So that game like has like my attention for sure. But this to me is up there for the most daunting schedule in the Big 12 this year. Only 4 road games, but 2 of them come after a bye. So I wonder if like that almost like negates some of the upside. And then they also play 4 of the 5 best teams in conference play. They don't play Utah, but then they get, in terms of odds, I mean, if we just go through who we're talking about, they play Kansas, they play at Oklahoma State, they play Iowa State, and they play Kansas State. And then they go to Arizona, who's also towards the top. So it's a relentless schedule. I agree that there's like some decent floor here that they probably still make a bowl game. But it's a tough schedule. And the defense does have some concerns. Another note, just randomly, but Garrett Green had the highest air yards of any quarterback in the country. He just didn't really convert on a lot of them. So he's got a big arm. He likes to chuck it down the field. If there is some polish now coming together, maybe this offense does get a new look that it didn't have last year, because it was a very ground-based offense. So I do wonder if maybe there is some untapped potential in this Westphal offense. Here is, though, where we find the drop-off in quality of teams, and maybe we could these teams might have just like less to say about just because they're in a different world. And I think maybe not to the public, but to us who are kind of locked in, Colorado is not part of the contenders of the Big 12. Win total 5.5 for Deion's team, shaded towards the over. So bowling is the expectation here. They bring back Shadur, but there's a lot of turnover pretty much every place else besides Travis Hunter, I guess. But whole new offensive line, new running back Dallin Hayden, 2 new Pat Shurmur, half new OC, new DC. There's talent for sure, but there's no real returning production. To me, there's a real bad kind of aura here, bad vibe, whatever you want to call it. All the offseason makes me think that like whatever you really think about this Colorado team, we saw it last year, this team might just be like a fade and like too much of a circus. Am I wrong to think that, Nick? Like maybe the numbers say one thing, but like I can't really bring myself to buy into this Colorado team. I project 6.1 wins, so I guess I'm over, but like that's like my number again with talent. Like I'm dinging them for kind of what's going on around the program. How do you see it?
So I understand where you're coming from. I think you make some really, really good points. I'm in a similar spot. 6.2 is my projected win total. And I think that it basically all comes down to Shadur Sanders. He grades out pretty high. And
yeah, he's really
the way
good.
that my numbers go, I do what I call video game ratings. They're designed after the college football game, and it's not exactly perfect because they actually do go past 99, but still, if you are high 90s, you're one of the best in the country. Shadur Sanders is 97. That's 7th in quarterback ratings. That when you have one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the country, that changes things a little bit. And so that, and I know he's got, there are some red flags with some of the things that he said and all, and talk vibes, not necessarily great in some ways there, but I don't know. The guy can throw for a lot of yards, and he's definitely going to be given every opportunity with the coaching staff, with his dad being the head coach. So also maybe the second best position group on the roster. I think definitely the second best position group on the roster is wide receivers.
Yeah.
That again, you look at those individual player ratings. Travis Hunter is high 90s. LeJontay Wester, based in large part due to the production that he put up at FAU, he's high 90s as well. Jimmy Horn Jr. back is a former all-conference player. It's a good-looking group on paper, but plenty of questions. How's the offensive line, of course, going to protect Sanders? He had a really ugly-looking injury at the end of last season. If he's back and fully healthy, it's a totally different thing. Travis Hunter, worry a little bit. Is he going to be a starter on both sides of the ball? How is that wear and tear going to impact him? The defense was terrible last season. So the numbers, the way they stack up, because they perhaps in some ways overinflate the talent on hand. I've got Colorado going over, but my confidence level is not particularly high because this is a program, I think, that if they get some, things started pretty perfectly last year and they ended poorly. If they don't start perfectly this year, does this team sort of start to spiral out of control? I think is a real concern. But I think 6 wins and getting to a bowl is a reasonable expectation.
Yeah. So Shadur, when he wasn't pressured, he was lights out. 76% completion percentage, 16 touchdowns, 25 completions of 20 or more yards. So he was lights out. Well, when he was sacked a ton. I believe he was sacked more than any other quarterback in college football last year. And now they're turning over the entire offensive line. So I wonder how that's all going to go. And you mentioned the schedule this year, and they beat TCU 21-point underdogs last year as this big underdog. They open against a North Dakota State team that is among the best in FCS ranks. They're, I think, like an 8-point favorite in that game. So they're thrown right into it. They go to play Nebraska, a new look, better Nebraska team. They play Colorado State on the road in Fort Collins, who is surely, eager to play them in a statement game. And then you look at the schedule in Big 12 play. They get Utah. They get Oklahoma State. They get Kansas State. They get at Arizona. They get at Kansas. They get at UCF.
UCF, yeah.
It's a really daunting schedule. Them and West Virginia, for my money, have the most difficult schedule. So it's an under or nothing for me. I haven't played it myself yet because I agree that there is some upside with this team. But to me, like, all signs point to this team probably flaming out yet again and again. This team starts 1-2. What's going to happen to that locker room? Because this does not strike me as a team that is going to rally around Coach Prime. So Colorado, definitely warning signs up. Curious your thoughts on Cincinnati. Year 2 of Scott Satterfield. Get Brennan Sorsby from Indiana, who I think fits the mold of what Satterfield wants to do from his time, at other schools. Even last year with Emory Jones, I think Sorsby, he was at Indiana, so it didn't look pretty, but he was capable, moving. He's running for his life most of the time, but a dual threat quarterback nonetheless. They got back Corey Kiner. They got Tyron Smith from UTEP in the transfer portal. The entire offensive line is back. This is a run-first offense that was, the offensive line did pretty well in terms of run protection. So even though the team only won one conference game and I was on their under, there were some things that looked okay. Defense was a disaster. They bring in an Iowa State linebacker coach to head up the defense this year. Transfers come in. Was year 1 a mulligan for Satterfield and this team might be on the upswing? Because I'm buying into what Cincinnati's doing here as maybe, like, of this bottom group, like the team I like the most. Maybe that could punch above their weight class and get like to a bowl game or something like that.
So I'm personally not super bought in, but the way that the numbers, come together are actually over. I've been referencing DraftKings. Did you have 5? Was that the
5.5?
Okay.
5.5.
So we're right there. We're like 5.4. So I'm not fully bought in. Part of that is Brendan Sorsby doesn't stack up particularly well from a player rating standpoint. I know there are some really smart folks that I trust their opinion who are high on him long term, excited to see what he can do in this offense. But the way that one, I don't have I don't have a mental like image of Brendan Sorsby as a quarterback, and I feel like I actually do for 98% of FBS quarterbacks. So he's just a little bit of a blind spot for me, and he doesn't. He's mid 70s in our player ratings, which is well below FBS average. If he steps up, becomes very productive the first couple of weeks, has good games against Towson and Pitt and Miami University, Houston. That's a pretty good Big 12 opener. His rating could rise, and then the Cincinnati rating as a whole will take a big step in the right direction. Scott Satterfield, his best teams in my memory have been the ones that can run the ball really well. That was a strength last season. They were top 40 in rushing offensive team performance. I do like Corey Kiner, a lot of experience on the offensive line. So I think that is a really, really good sign moving forward. And then, he did a pretty good job bringing in, at least on paper, some receivers that will add some playmaking ability, some weapons in the passing game. So I think the offense for Cincinnati really could be much improved. Defensively, I'm a little bit worried. As you said, last year did not go well. The returning production numbers are not great, 90th overall, and their best player on the entire team, Dante Corleone, the school announced last Friday in June that he was going to be out indefinitely with blood clots in his lungs. So they're hopeful that he'll be able to come back to the field, but not sure when. And he's a guy who passed up, probably would have been drafted an NFL draft pick this past year to come back to Cincinnati for his third year junior, or he's going into what would be his senior season. I think he redshirted his first year. But anyway, Corleone, second team All Big 12 defensive lineman, NFL future, 320-pounder. If he's not on the field, that defense certainly loses its best player, and what was a unit that really struggled last season is that much potentially worse. So I'm not, like I said, fully bought in. Not sure that this team's going to be able to navigate what is such a wide open conference to be able to cobble together enough wins to get to bowl eligibility. But I think that they're close, and I think they'll be an improved team.
Yeah. Schedule fair, I'd say. Home game at Pitt isn't a lock win. Neither is at Miami of Ohio in a rivalry game. They actually lost that game last year. But they do host Arizona State and Houston in conference play. They do go to Colorado, but they also host West Virginia and TCU, which could be, I have those lined as, small underdog coin flip type games. So there is some room for Cincinnati to get, to bowl eligibility if Sorsby clicks. And like you mentioned, maybe the defense comes together. Another team that I think some are angling for maybe a bounce back is Baylor. Similar win total, about 5.5, 65 to 1 to win the conference. They bring in Jake Spavital, who comes from Texas State head coach. He was at Cal last year, did reignite that offense. But this has really unraveled quickly for Dave Aranda. Nick, do you think that this is a Neil Brown-like resurgence where they have a huge bounce back for Baylor after being kind of left for dead? Dave Aranda is definitely on the hot seat here. DeQuan Finn likely the starter, we think. Maybe Robertson the incumbent, but we'll go with Finn, I think, ends up winning the job. 4 or 5 back on the line. Dominic Robinson's back at running back. The defense is what the big issue was. They allowed more than 3 points per drive, only 18 sacks. 80% is back, so yay for continuity, but they were terrible. So can Dave Aranda fix this, or is Baylor kind of circling the drain here?
Yeah, on that note, if my good buddy and CFP Winning Edge podcast co-host Xavier Trish has a saying, maybe other people said it, I've only ever heard him say it, but when we talk returning production, he's like, yeah, but old garbage just stinks worse. So that's kind of what
at least they know each other.
So I get that. I understand that. And that I do keep that in mind anytime I look at a defense that was as bad as Baylor, and I look and say, oh, they're 7th in returning production. But then I also think, oh, man, Dave Aranda, throughout his career was considered a defensive genius. And yet it went really badly last season. But I think that potentially, he could turn it around. He could make that an improved unit, but that's more maybe wishful thinking. But then also, looking at somewhat recent history, and this Baylor program's been a little bit of a roller coaster. They were terrible in 2020, top 10 team in team performance in 2021, top 40 in 2022, and then last season, obviously, it fell off. But I do think that this Baylor team has bounce back potential. I like the moves that they made on the offensive side of the ball. I do have Finn projected to be the starting quarterback. Is a little bit of a concern moving up from the MAC to the Big 12, but I think that he's proven enough, 32 games as a starter, that he's going to be able to step in and be a good, decent quarterback in the Big 12 that maybe has a ceiling, maybe has the potential to be a little bit more. I like Ashton Hawkins transfer coming in. He was great at Texas State. I've always kind of had a thing for Michael Trigg. I think that he's somebody who's so athletic, can be a great receiving tight end. It just has not clicked for him so far. And he's, of course, so well traveled. I don't know. I mean, the returning production numbers look really, really good. Baylor as a team, I don't know. I want to believe that this team is maybe the best candidate to be a bounce back team. But other than returning production, I really don't have a great argument as for why. I've just always kind of liked Dave Aranda, and I could see it happening, but that usually is not a great plan. Usually I like to rely on the numbers, and they're not all the way there for me.
Yeah. The Spavital hire gives me some bullishness because I was high on Cal last year, and they ended up getting over their win total with an offense that really kind of carried that bad defense. The schedule keeps me off of Baylor, though. The early it's not a Big 12 game, but it is a road trip to Utah, followed by Air Force, which is never fun to play, like on a quick turnaround. And then you're back out on the road to play Colorado, and then you're back home to play BYU, and then you're back on the road to play Iowa State. It's a tough start to a year where things can go sideways very, very quickly, and that gives me a lot of concern for a team that probably needs a hot start to save Aranda's job. Like, it needs to get the ball rolling quickly, whereas if this team sputters, maybe Aranda's out of their job a little bit faster than usual, or then maybe he would have gotten a longer leash. So that's a bit of a concern. I do see some upside on the offense. Maybe this team is an over team, because I don't know if there's like this defense necessarily just making it click because they return 80% of their production. This defense was, again, 3 points per drive allowed, 18 sacks. It was pretty awful. So Baylor, I'm not super interested in. Houston, my only question is this, because they return Donovan Smith, who may be available. Zion Chris is pretty interesting. Willie Fritz is in, though. So Nick, do you see this as year 0, where this is like a complete wash, or is it year 1 where maybe this team maybe not go bowling, but they could be frisky in a Big 12 that is in flush with dominant teams?
I think they could be a tough team to beat. I think that this could be a nice foundational year for Willie Fritz at Houston.
So year 0.5.
Yeah, I think so. Expectations are not high, so you could come in and maybe surprise a little bit if you do make a run at bowl eligibility, or playing for bowl eligibility in the month of November adds a little excitement. And those last couple of games are certainly good opportunities if you're trying to get that 5th and 6th win against Baylor and BYU. So I could see this team maybe really improving over the course of the year. The schedule does not open very, very well. So it's going to be difficult to really build that momentum early on, unless you get an unexpected 2-1, 3-1 start, which is possible. But anyway, it like a lot of the teams that we discussed, there is a much different conversation to be had based on what we get as far as the quarterback play goes. Donovan Smith, I mean, he's in all these, too early NFL draft first round mocks for next year, right? And it's surprising a lot of people that pay a lot of attention to college football. But does that mean, okay, yeah, maybe the ceiling really is there, that he could be an elite quarterback there? Or I remember this time last year, Donovan Smith's, DFS and CFF projections that I do were off the charts. Just,
Yeah.
I mean, it was really kind of surprising how well, the projections I put together for those really thought, he would be able to do. And he wasn't fully healthy, and that was part of it. Concerned a little bit, will he be fully healthy this year, based on he wasn't there for spring practice, or was very limited. I think he was on the field for some of it. But the addition of Zion Chris is kind of an interesting wrinkle, because I'm pretty high on him. I know some other folks really are as well.
He showed something at Louisiana last year. I was impressed.
Yeah,
Got hurt
absolutely.
at the end, but I liked him.
Yeah, and our mutual friend Chris Moxley is
Yes.
I know particularly high on Zion Chris. So that's an interesting move to bring in. I know there are some who thought, okay, maybe he really can push Donovan Smith, even a healthy Donovan Smith, for that starting job, because Smith threw 13 picks last year, wasn't as productive running the football as maybe we might expect. 400 yards and 6 touchdowns, pretty good for most quarterbacks, but Smith has 700-800 yard potential, I think, double-digit touchdown potential on the ground, and just wasn't quite able to go to that level. So if Smith really does play like somebody who could be in that first round conversation, then this is a completely different Houston team. Maybe Willie Fritz is able to find that and capitalize on it. But also, if not, he's got a pretty good other option in Zion Chris, who maybe could, I'm not saying he's going to be a future first rounder, but could maybe be a more consistent quarterback long term. But otherwise, there's not a major sign to indicate to me that this is a team that's going to take a big step forward. The returning production numbers are middle of the road. The defense was terrible last year. Brought in a lot of transfers. A lot of them followed Fritz from Tulane. So I think they're going to be improved, but I don't always buy into that. So this team, maybe more so than any we've discussed so far, I think has the most questions, and I can kind of talk myself into being positive about them a little bit, but there's just not much evidence to me to suggest that this is going to be a team that's really going to be in the mix in that. Really making a run at a bowl. I think they could be a much improved team at the end of the season, and maybe they kind of finish hot with wins against Baylor and BYU and carry that over into whether it's, we're going to call 2025 year one for Willie Fritz. But I just think that right now there are too many questions for me to be too optimistic about the immediate future.
Yeah, I agree. I think Houston's going to try. I think the game plan is going to be, with hiring Barbe from Mississippi State, bring back their top 3 running backs. Let's run the ball. Let's maybe avoid turnovers, play some keep away, a Tulane-like defense, hiring defensive line coach, bringing over a lot of Tulane transfers. I think that's going to be the game plan. Maybe it's like a team that as the year goes on becomes a play-on team. Team last year that was similar to that at times was Arizona State. Is this the year where they start to build up? It seems like new OC Marcus Arroyo, he made it seem like Sam Leavitt took the job, but Jeff Sims is now there. I hope for Arizona State fans' sake, that is Sam Leavitt, not Jeff Sims. Scadabo's back at running back. The defense showed some flashes, but didn't force a lot of turnovers, only 60% RP. Any strong sentiment here, Nick, on Arizona State year 2 of the Kenny Dillingham era? Because there were some flashes there for sure last year.
I like the long-term outlook for Kenny Dillingham and this Arizona State program. If you're looking for a team that could emerge, as Texas and Oklahoma are leaving the Big 12, who is well positioned to maybe someday become that dominant recruiting team, I think you could make a case that Arizona State could make a move in that direction. But I'm not fully bought in that this is the year. I think they'll be a better team. I think there is a foundation, that the talent level has come up a bit. The work that Dillingham and this coaching staff have done in the transfer portal over the last 2 years, I think we will see it begin to pay off. They're top 50 in roster strength, which is not excellent, but that's not much different than an Arizona. It's better than an Iowa State. So they're not going to be severely outmanned lining up against pretty much anybody in the Big 12. It's just, are they going to be able to put it together, turn that talent into better performance on the field? And last year was really pretty bad. I mean, 110th in overall team performance, 115th offensively, 98th defensively. So they're going to have to be much improved on the field to, really take that big step. And I do think that, I do believe in a year two bump in a lot of situations. And so I do think that this will be a better team, but I think they're going to go from, maybe one of the worst teams in college football, statistically speaking, to losing a lot of close games where they're much more competitive. So maybe the record is going to end up similar, maybe step in the right direction, but not really challenging for bowl eligibility, but then setting themselves up for 2025 to maybe start to build into a consistent winner, and potentially, especially if that recruiting picks up, like I think there's the potential it could, maybe really, really bright days down the line. But I think this year is, if last year was year zero, maybe for Dillingham, this is more the year one.
Lose 51 games to injury on the offensive line alone. So, I mean, this team really was gutted by injuries, didn't do any favors.
Great point. Yep.
It's tough to find wins on the schedule. I mean, sure, they're home against Wyoming, but Wyoming is no slouch. Home against Mississippi State, who we don't really know, but still an SEC team. At Texas State, one of the best group of 5 teams on the road on a short week. They host BYU. They go to Cincinnati. It's tough to see so many wins here for a team. So I do think the quality of play could pick up with some better health, but it's just tough to get too excited about Arizona State just this year. I think let's wait and see for it to come together. Last team of the Big 12 teams we're going to talk about, BYU. Long story short, I don't have much to say about them. I have them favored in one game. It's home against Houston, and they'll be favored by, I have 1.5. And Southern Illinois, of course. So I have a favorite in 2 games. Sorry, one FCS team and then one coin flip game against Houston. There's not a lot of talent on the roster, in my opinion, outside of LJ Martin, the running back. Quarterback competition. Retzlaff showed some signs last year, or it's Jerry Bohannon who hasn't played in more than a year. I don't know. I just have not a lot of interest in this BYU team, and I don't really think that there's much to call home about besides a really nice home field advantage.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. They're 90th in my overall power rankings, dead last in the Big 12. A lot of the numbers last season did not look particularly good. The returning production numbers, nothing special. So unless Bohannon, becomes the player we saw 3-4 years ago, where it looked like maybe he could be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12, there's not a lot of reason, I think, to be optimistic. LJ Martin, decent at running back. Couple of flashes at the wide receiver position, maybe an interesting tight end or two, true freshman Reiner Swanson, Keanu Hill, converted wide receiver, but defensively, this was a team that was really banged up last year and struggled, but also just doesn't return a ton. I've got BYU favored in just the one game against Southern Illinois, but as you said, that home field advantage, when we were talking Oklahoma State, that Friday night in Provo, I mean, this BYU team may not win very many games, but they might put a scare into a team or two, and maybe find a way to pull off a shocking home upset against an Oklahoma State. If all the conditions line up for that, weird things can happen on a week night in Provo. Yeah. Kansas late in the season coming to Provo could be interesting, but this team is also very capable of losing to Wyoming and Arizona State and Houston. So yeah, I'm in a similar mind, but there still could be a couple of tight games where this team is maybe more competitive than you expect on that particular day. But I think long term, my expectations are not very high for BYU.
Oh, totally. So if you're still listening, which I hope you are, Nick has been so gracious. So the only independent that I deem worthy of getting a full preview is Notre Dame. And with a conference, as we're doing these previews, this one kind of made the most sense given all the clump of teams. So I want to throw Notre Dame in here because, especially with the expanded playoff, you need to have an eye on Notre Dame because it's a team that, look at the odds, they are favored to make the playoff. They have a win total of 10.5. This, I think we can agree, is the best team Marcus Freeman has put on the field so far in his short tenure. They go out, they land the likes of Riley Leonard in the transfer portal. They bring Owe over as well. The offensive line needs to replenish some talent, but I mean, when you lose a top 5 draft pick from the offensive line, that's to be expected. They also go out and get Mike Denbrock from LSU, one of the premier offensive coordinators. So to me, this is all systems go. So Nick, my question to you is, how does Notre Dame not make the playoff? Is it Riley Leonard isn't healthy? Because I look at the schedule on the road in week 1 against A&M. I don't even think it's make or break if they lose that game because they're going to be favored in every other game they play, and they have enough signature games that they could still get into the playoff as an 11-1 team at large. So, Nick, how do you see Notre Dame this season? Because I'm high on them.
Yeah, I'm pretty high on them as well. My projections have Notre Dame even favored at Texas A&M in week 1. So
I believe I think A&M's minus 1.5. So it's a coin flip.
Very close. Yeah, I've got it. Notre Dame favored by about 4. My numbers love Notre Dame.
Okay.
6th in the power rankings, favored in every regular season game. If you wanted to get really in-depth and nerdy about it, I did like a 45, 50-minute preview of Notre Dame on Good Morning College Football on the Campus Canton YouTube channel. But to answer your question, how do they not make it? Yeah, it probably has something to do with Riley Leonard. Although I think that the experience, the little glimpse we saw of Steve Angeli last year in the bowl game, not bad. You know, I think that the drop off is not insurmountable, perhaps, even if Leonard is not fully healthy or goes down with some other injury this year. I think that the quarterback play maybe should be passable. But what is the real ceiling of this offense? What is the overall, who are the real playmakers, right? They're counting on Chris Mitchell, who put up great numbers, but at FIU, there was some buzz about Jaden Harrison in the spring camp, but he's a transfer from Marshall, where he's really more of an impact player as a return man, not really a receiver. How is that wide receiver room going to come together? Who's going to step up and really stress opposing defenses? I think they're going to be able to run the ball okay, but I think they will miss a little bit of the size and strength of Audric Estime. The offensive line, of course, very, very talented last year, but lose their 2 best players. So, perhaps the question how they miss out is they just don't score enough. They're not an offense that's capable of. They turn into sort of an Iowa in some ways because this team doesn't look particularly talented. They're 31st in offensive roster strength. The defense is a completely different story. They're number 2 in defensive roster strength. It was a top 10 unit last season. I have very few questions at all. Maybe is Benjamin Morrison going to be back and fully healthy after suffering an injury this spring? But beyond that, they have a national award winner, All-American at safety, and Xavier Watts, added 2 potential starters, impact players in the secondary as well. So I think that's going to offset Morrison a little bit. The defensive line looks really, really good, a top 3 unit nationally on paper. They brought in RJ Oben, the other Duke transfer, who is a really, really good, productive, experienced player. I mentioned that our individual player ratings don't stop at 99, our video game ratings. This Notre Dame defense has 4 players that go over a 100. So that's fairly rare. So there's just defensively, this could be one of the best units in the country. They could suffocate teams like Texas A&M and Louisville and even Georgia Tech. I'm really high on their offense this year. Florida State, that's going to be tough in South Bend. USC on the road even. This Notre Dame team is probably going to be the best defense that all of those
Yeah.
teams are going to face, and it's going to be very, very difficult to score. It's just, as Notre Dame going to be able to keep up? Are they going to be able to put together a productive enough offense, replacing as many key pieces as they have to? And then, that wide receiver room was a little bit of an issue last year as well. Did they really, address it well enough to have the confidence that they're going to be able to surround, hopefully, a healthy Riley Leonard with some playmakers that are going to be able to go out and win a game 24-21 or even maybe 17-13, something like that. Because I think this defense really, really is good enough, and I think the schedule is manageable enough. I was going to say, in first answer to your question, would a 10-2 Notre Dame team, are they a lock for the playoff? Maybe the schedule's not quite good enough if your losses are Texas A&M and Florida State, because what really would be your signature win. But I don't know. A lot of 10-2 Notre Dame teams are probably going to be going to playoffs in the next few years. So I think it's definitely possible, depending on how things play out. But I think an 11-1 team absolutely is a lock.
So I think the interesting part about Notre Dame is I think the pass catching group is going to be better this year. Getting Bo Collins, who I think Clemson's offense a little stuck in the mud. I think Bo Collins, with the mix of Chris Mitchell, can maybe unlock him a little bit more, kind of change his role a little bit more. To me, the key is, can Riley Leonard keep his mobility up? Because it was 2 off-season or late season off. He had 2 procedures since he last played. So to me, Leonard isn't the passer that Sam Hartman was, but what he lacks in terms of the ability, like precision passing, he makes up with it with his elite ability to extend plays, to get downfield. He's so big and physical that he's able to pick up yards on his own. Jeremiah Love is getting rave reviews out of spring camp. So, and with Denbrock there, I do wonder if, as long as Leonard's healthy, I think this Notre Dame offense should be good to go, to be outside of USC, the better, and Georgia Tech, even, because I think Georgia Tech's offense is really good. But I think this offense should be good to go, to outscore anybody, like including A&M, to be honest. So I like the offensive floor. To me, it comes down to, is Riley Leonard healthy? And why I think this team ultimately does go to the playoff, probably as an 11-1 team, if they lose to A&M in week 1 or they just get tripped up along the line. It is that defense with Watts, Cross, Al Golden calling it. I mean, this defense just has an insanely high level of play, top 3 to 5 probably in the entire country. I mean, with the Ohio States and Michigans of the world, and then Georgia, of course. So to me, Notre Dame, I think the team does end up in the playoff. I think that the ceiling doesn't necessarily get there, because you do mention, I don't know if the offense is that good to necessarily get past some of the higher level offenses that blend it with a great defense. But I think this team should be good enough to at least make the playoff and justify a price. I see like minus 170 at FanDuel right now to make the playoff. Like, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And I do like to watch Jordan Faison too. I forgot to mention his name. Could end up being a pretty exciting receiver there as well, potentially former walk-on lacrosse player. But I made I was thinking like worst case scenario, obviously bringing in Iowa. I'm not expecting that, but maybe a game. Maybe there's a game like that where that Notre Dame defense has to win it really, really ugly. I agree. I think the offense is definitely a much bigger question mark, but it's not that bad. It's they're going to be fine, I think, and hopefully some of those early questions will be answered on the offensive line, playmakers, and things like that. I think that this Notre Dame team legitimately is a playoff contender that could make things quite interesting.
Yeah. So Nick, I appreciate the time. Before I let you plug your stuff, to recap my best bets given out on the show, as we talked about. So I have 3 that are currently available that I am on. So we are recording this about a week or so before this is going to be released, but hopefully this is still within range. So I like Kansas State under 9.5. You can find that at DraftKings at minus 145. I like the UCF over 7.5, minus 105 at FanDuel. and Arizona under 7.5, which is -112, also at FanDuel. Nick, any bets? I know we went through every team, but is there anything that really sticks out to you that you want to share with the viewers? And also, please plug your show, plug your Twitter, plug everything that you're doing this offseason and beyond.
Great, thank you. Yeah. So I just out of habit use DraftKings. We've done it for our preview podcast for the last
I have no
3 years.
sponsor. You could shout out anybody. It doesn't
Oh
matter.
yeah, okay. But so if these numbers are different, that's just sort of how I built my sheet and what I referenced. So yeah, all the go shop best price, all that good stuff. But we've been doing those previews, conference previews, where we give an official win total projection for every FBS team for the last 3 years. Over that time, we've tracked it and have been 60.4% on the right side as far as those win totals overall. Every season has been 55.6% or better. That was last year, actually. It was our worst year at 55.6%. So I feel pretty good about those numbers, but also have tried to work on some things to hopefully get us some even better numbers at the extremes. But all that said, I trust the numbers, but they certainly aren't perfect. But usually when they indicate a plus or minus of one full win, those numbers will go up 3, 4, 5 percentage points as far as those wins and losses go. And there were 5 teams that met that criteria in the Big 12 that we talked about today. The biggest one, and it might be our biggest difference in projected win total for the entire season, is K-State. We're actually 2.5 wins below the 9.5. So our numbers hate K-State. I am fully prepared to be wrong, and they end up being just as good as a lot of folks think. But yeah, that's kind of a crazy number. So when it's that far off, then I wonder, okay, what am I doing wrong? But so anyway, others, we are under by at least a win on Iowa State, under 7.5. We are under TCU. 7. Do I have that right? TCU 7.5. That seems like a lot. So we're under that by more than a win. We are also under Utah, under 9.5 by more than a win there. See, that is more of an 8-win team. And Houston, we are over 3.5 is maybe just a little bit too low for a Willie Fritz coach team, and a lot of winnable games on the schedule. So a lot of unders in the Big 12, oddly enough, especially in the high end. I wonder if 8-4 team ends up being a 9-4 conference champ here in the Big 12. There is no great team potentially. That's at least what the numbers are sort of indicating.
I think, to put some context to your numbers, and we won't ramble because we're pushing 2 hours, but I think to put some context to it, though, is the fact that all these teams are so clumped together that the expectation that, to build up a 10-win resume, you need a win probability of, you need some 90 percenters, you need some 90, you need some really, really likely wins. And there just really aren't that many likely wins in this conference this year. And there might be kind of that glut in the middle where there's a lot of 6-6, 7-5, 8-4 even, which is going to keep some of those higher priced teams like Kansas State and Utah underneath the total. Yeah. But Nick, you were awesome, man. I really appreciate it. You crush as always. Gonna have to have you on again during the season for sure to pick your brain on all things college football. So I really appreciate it, man. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at CFB Winning Edge. And Nick, anything else you want to plug before we get out of here?
Campus Canton and the Campus Canton YouTube channel. Good Morning College Football 3 times a week. CFB Winning Edge podcast. We're in the middle of those conference previews. But then, if you're not a member, check us out at campuscanton.com. There's a lot more than just what I have to offer. You can join for as little as $2.99 per month. Get access to Discord and written content, tools for fantasy football, college, NFL, Devy, all that good stuff. But then on the higher side of things, the all 22 tier and the C2C Winning Edge tier, you get access to all my databases and tons and tons of information, more coming even later this month with the stat projections coming out soon.
As a member and someone who uses Nick's stuff, I really, really do recommend it. If you want all the preseason win totals that I'm betting, you get it in the Google Doc that is in the podcast description. You get all my plays at the bet stamp at RW33. And of course, follow me on Twitter at Reed Wallach. We'll be back next time as conference preview season rolls along. Everybody enjoy the summer. We are drawing that much closer